Hello and welcome to the American Compass podcast. I'm Drew Holden, managing editor at American Compass, and your guest host for today's conversation was Salena Zito, staff reporter and columnist for the Washington Examiner and author of the new book Butler, about being 4 feet from President Trump when he was nearly assassinated on the campaign trail. We talk about the role of place in American politics and the division between the placed and the placeless, and why the division between the placed and the placeless is so important to understanding the rise of Trump and his movement, and how the reaction to the assassination and memorial of Charlie Kirk threw that dissonance into stark relief. And we discuss the problem of elite opinion makers in the media, in academia, in elected office, and beyond, who almost exclusively come from the placeless bubble, and what it leads many to miss or misunderstand. But before we get to that, I need to tell you about what we've got going on at Commonplace this week. On Sunday, I had a piece explaining why the Teamsters hosted an event featuring Republican members of Congress and White House staff focused on Rerum Novarum, the 1891 Catholic encyclical about workers from Pope Leo XIII. And Leah Sargent reviews Brian Potter's new book, The Origins of Efficiency, and diagnoses why, for all the benefits improvements in efficiency has provided, a hyper-focus on it risks a decline in the skills and knowledge needed when systems fail. So be sure to check out those pieces and more throughout the long weekend ahead. But here's my conversation with Salena Zito. And Salena Zito, thank you so much for joining the American Compass podcast.
Oh my gosh, thanks so much for having me. I'm really honored and thrilled.
Well, I'm sure most of our audience is very familiar with your work and what you do, but for the few who maybe aren't, Salena is a really thoughtful and a really perceptive reporter. She's a leather reporter, which means she goes to places and actually talks about the issues that matter to the people who know what's happening. And Salena, I think one of the reasons why I find your reporting so impactful and so poignant is that, you know, in a world where the digital age allows people to talk about anything they want in the entire universe, you make the time and the energy to go out and report things and report the actual story from where the story is taking place. And so often, that's the kind of communities and the issues that the legacy media isn't talking about. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, that's fair. I think that oftentimes why I sort of fall below the radar, which is, by the way, fine with me, in sort of when people have just the national discussion about what's going on in this country. And I don't avoid, clicky stories. I just don't think that's what drives people's votes.
Yeah.
I think it's much more nuanced. There's much more context. Nostalgia and place plays a large part of it. Familiarity plays a large part of it. And the difference likely of probably for me is my geography. I'm located in Western Pennsylvania, and I rarely write from a computer. I'm usually in my car driving around. Last year, I put 80,000 miles on my car, and it's about understanding people where they are and
Yeah.
listening to what they have to say, but going into a story, not with the story in mind, but to find out what the story is.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. You know, I feel like every time I text you, I get a response like, "Hey, I'm driving." And I'm like, how is she possibly? She's driving at every moment of every day. Maybe she doesn't like me. Maybe she doesn't want to talk to me. Like, no knock against you if you don't. But I can't imagine spending that much time on the road. But I think your work speaks to the value of putting in that time, putting in those hours, putting in those miles. And you had a comment the other day on X that I think kind of captured this in a microcosm. So I know you've reported a lot on the Charlie Kirk assassination and the memorial, and I know you knew him, and so I'm sure I really can't imagine how difficult it's got to be to try and unpack the political messiness around it and the political topics. But I think there's a really important fissure that you called out the other day that I want to talk to you about, and I think our viewers and our listeners will be really interested in hearing about. There was a tweet from a guy named Thomas Chatterton Williams from The Atlantic, where he had posted a couple images of the Kirk Memorial, which was a big, it was a huge event, tons and tons of people. It was very religious, very openly religious. And he said, I want to make sure I get this quote right. He said, he had never felt, in all of his years of traveling, going all across the world, he had never, quote, felt so estranged from the surrounding culture as I am from the aesthetics and sensibility of this movement. That tweet generated a lot of, I think, a lot of anger and resentment and frustration and a lot of kind of pointing and laughing on the right. But you made a point that I think is really, really valuable, that I think goes beyond all of that, which is that this kind of perfectly encapsulates a thing that you talk a lot about, which is the difference between people who are placed and people who are placeless. Could you tell our viewers, our listeners, a little bit about what that is and what that dynamic means?
So when I saw that tweet and I caught it as soon as he put it out there, a lot of people made fun of him, and I didn't. I thought it was a really great opportunity to talk about why things are so different between maybe me and other reporters. And I really, my book Butler really talks about place a lot, and most reporters in this country live in DC or New York or one of the 10 counties that surround them. That does not make them bad. Most went to Ivy League schools. Also doesn't make them bad. Most of them hang out with each other. They have shared interest. Also doesn't make them bad. But they are not rooted to where they are. Now, maybe they grew up there, but most of them didn't. And so they don't have a sense of place and connection in a way that someone that lives, say, where I live in Western Pennsylvania, where 8 out of 10 people live like 50 miles from where they grew up and have Sunday supper.
Right.
Don't even realize that sense of place actually compels them to vote a way that on paper they normally wouldn't. So what he was saying is something that I've been talking about for years.
Yeah.
And that is our cultural curators. So what do I mean by that? People that live in the super zip codes that have the most impact on what's in our culture. It's not just legacy media. It's also corporations, institutions, academia, government, Hollywood, right? They all are in this same centralized place. These places are also the most wealthiest zip codes in the entire country. These places are also have the highest concentration of college education. Well, you go in Pennsylvania and like 39% of people in Pennsylvania have college education.
Right.
That's not the majority.
Right. Yeah.
And 25% of those people don't even use a college education for the job that they're in. Many of them are working in places like the gas industry or, a number of different industries that have nothing to do with where they got their sheepskin from. We're more like buck doe skin out here, right?
Yeah.
And so they make these assessments in media, but also in all those other institutions that I talk about. And they're not hitting the mark with either voters or customers or parents that are sending their kids off to these schools.
Yeah,
that was like the discussion I would have loved to have had, but he appeared to not be interested, and everyone else was just like either yay, you're right, or no, you're wrong. But that memorial is very much the country that I cover, and that memorial is also where the votes are that decide elections.
Right. And I think that
they live in DC and New York, they live in Arizona.
Right. Right. And I think there's a big, almost a cleavage, like a national kind of cultural cleavage. Not just that the Thomas Chatterton Williams of the world don't enjoy being in that environment. Right. It's not that like this is something that is not their cup of tea. It's not the way that they spend their time. They'd rather be at brunch in DC or whatever. It's that on a really, really fundamental level, they don't understand what they are and why they exist. And so the reporting, the way that I think a lot of these voices talk about them, it's almost anthropological, right? It's almost like they have stumbled across an uncontacted tribe in the Amazon to say and look around and say, wow, look how curious all of this is. And this is half of the country that they share with people who aren't like them, that they're often reporting about or trying to.
Well, and I think it's really important to note that the people in the middle of the country love to go to DC. They love to go New York. They go there, they take their family to see a Broadway play. They go and have brunch. They go and enjoy everything that New York and DC has to offer. They go
Yeah.
to Europe, right?
Yeah.
They want to go see the world. And it's not the world they live in, but they embrace it. They're like, hey,
Right.
let's do this. And it's sort of the opposite with a lot of people in DC and New York, because it's different and they're not comfortable with it and they can't believe that they're their fellow Americans. And that makes me, honestly, it makes me really, really sad.
Yeah, I think sad is the right way to put it. The one other thing that I guess jumps out to me is that because of this sort of dissonance and because of this like kind of separate understandings, there's got to be political implications. And I know you write a lot about the political implications. You mentioned it drives how people vote. What do you think is kind of at a high level the difference between someone who is placeless and how they vote and someone who is placed and how they vote? What are the priorities? What are the interests? What are the sorts of things they're thinking about from your reporting that are different?
So for the placeless, climate change is very, very important.
Sure.
For the people that are placed, of course they care about the climate. They have to live in it.
Right,
And a
right.
lot of them are also, work in industries that are often attacked, but they also lived in those places and fish and hunt and swim and have cabins.
Yeah.
So they, more than anyone, want the climate to be safe, but it isn't a religion to them. Okay.
Sure.
That's just sort of one example. Pushing race issues is another thing that is, and divisional race is very, very important to the placeless. However, they tend to live in not very diverse communities where people in the middle of the country do. And for the first time, and in particular the working class, and for the first time, you didn't have to, in last year's election, you didn't have to silo people off and say white working class, black working class, Hispanic working class, and how they voted
Sure.
differently. They voted the same.
Right.
And they don't see race in the way the placeless do. The placed see it as, that's my neighbor. I don't
Yeah.
see what color they are. And that goes both ways.
Right.
For the placeless, everything is about race. And people don't think that way in the middle of the country.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds right to me too, as someone who admittedly lives on the coast and has lived my whole life on the coast. And there's almost like there are these really, really dense echo chambers, I think, in so many of these communities. And to me, I like you, I talk a lot about the media. I'm very interested in the media and the things that kind of drive them to not report things accurately. And I think this is a huge part of it, is that if you have no familiarity with the people you're talking about, then the ways you describe them from the comfort of your editorial room, from the comfort of your newsroom, aren't going to be as accurate as someone who sees them as flesh and blood humans, as their neighbor, as someone who they see at the supermarket, right? And so you end up with not just this cultural fissure, but I think almost this lack of understanding, at least from one community to another, that absolutely accelerates all sorts of political problems.
Yeah, so I live in the middle of Paris of Appalachia. Pennsylvania, where I live, is both Appalachia and basically the Midwest. So
Yeah.
I have an understanding of that culturally. But, there's a reason I don't fly. And it's not because I'm afraid of flying, although it's very annoying to fly. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
But the reason I don't fly, and I take back roads. I don't even take interstates or
That
turnpike.
I didn't know.
Oh yeah, I only take U.S. routes or state routes because I get to know the people, not just in personally, but also look around at their lives and see what's going well and what's not going well. And so there are plenty of places that I'll go to, like out west. I've covered the culture and life of the American Indian, right? And I don't really have that experience here. But I go out there and I spend like a few days and I keep going back and I understand it. And I don't just fly in, look at the strangest thing I see, say that's what's going on, and fly out.
Yep. I think that's a really important point, is that there isn't the Like you're not looking for something that's weird or curious,
Right.
or like your one moment to kind of highlight the experience, right? It's if
Right.
you're enmeshed in a community or around people, you get to know them in a way that isn't like the kind of nut picking of the weirdest thing you saw while you were out over there.
It's important you brought that up. In 2016, when I was covering the first presidential election with President Donald Trump in it, I would go to the rallies, but I would drive to them. I would usually get there a couple days ahead of time. I always stay in a bed and breakfast because those are small business owners and they know where all
Great.
the bodies are buried in town. They know all
Yep.
the gossip.
Amazing.
And I
Yep.
would do things. I would go to the diners. I would go to church. I would go, and just like walk down the street and talk to people and observe how their worlds were, and then sort of immerse myself. And I would go to the rally. I would get there hours early and talk to people and get a general understanding. Where most national reporters fly in together, get
Yep.
on a bus together, stay at the airport, maybe if they're staying overnight at the airport Marriott together, and then come in on the bus together and sit together. And I remember watching like all these news reports, and there'd be like 25,000 people there. 99.9% of them, the most lovely people you ever met.
Totally. Yep.
But maybe there'd be like 3 or 4 people that were off, weird, whatever,
Yep.
peculiar. They would all be in every single one of their reports. And they
Totally
would
believe that.
pick out the strangest thing that Trump would say and say, this is what he says, and these are his people. And I'm like, well, no wonder no one thought he was going to win. Because
Yep.
you didn't tell
Right.
the whole story.
Yeah, yeah. That absolutely checks out to me too. And I think it's like a caustic style of reporting, right? I think at the end of the day, it really does drive kind of this. I don't want to call it a national divorce, but like this real cleavage in our culture. So I want to talk specifically about the way that the press covered and the way that people on the left and kind of in elite institutions talked about the Kirk Memorial, because I think to your point about the place versus the placelessness, I think one of the things that has run through the Trump coalition, as I've seen it, as I've listened to you talk about and read you report about, is that this placedness, right, this tie to a community, is something that is deep within the current of the Make America Great Again movement, within Trump's base. Do you think that's fair? Is that what you've seen too?
Yeah. I encourage people to read my book, Butler, not because I wrote it. And Butler, what happened in Butler is part of it, but there's a lot more about
Yeah.
laying out about the importance of place, how poorly both Biden and Harris got that, what's
Yeah.
happening in both parties, and how it has led to where we are today. That is as equally as important as being a witness to history.
Yeah, that sounds right to me. And I think, one of the other things too is that this isn't like political leaders not understanding this tie to place is not a new phenomenon, right? I think this is part of the reason why Donald Trump won in 2016 is that the GOP that existed before him also didn't recognize the importance of place,
No,
also
not-
didn't recognize the importance of community. Why is it, do you think, that for so long these issues were ignored or not talked about? How is it possible that for decades and decades this truly animating issue got short shrift from both political parties, from the national media, and yet was so vital to what Americans actually care about?
So it was never part of the Republican coalition. Never.
Yeah.
However, and the Democrats owned this, and then they started to take advantage of them, and then they started to just expect them to show up, and felt they were entitled to them, and they started speaking to them as these were the New Deal Democrats, and they stopped speaking to them, and they went towards the party of the ascendant. Barack Obama did not do that in 2008. He kept the New Deal Democrats as part of his coalition, but in 2012 he lobbed them off. He was the first president, modern president, to win less voters than he did in his first election, and those voters didn't vote for Romney because he didn't get them either.
Yeah, sure.
He was nice guy, really nice guy. However, He was not the guy who heard and saw them. He was the guy that was going to show up with a box at their desk and escort them out of the building when they lost their job.
Yeah.
And so the Republicans have Trump uniquely understood them. Again, this is really, really one of the most important parts of the book, as well as place. He uniquely saw them. He uniquely heard them. Republicans before that did not. And now they are a part of his coalition. J.D. Vance is also very good in understanding it. Marco Rubio was very good at understanding that in 2010 when he took on the establishment of his party and ran in Florida. And he was unique to that. And so the working class and the middle class are now firmly in the arms of the Republican Party. I think if the next two people are the future, Marco Rubio or J.D. Vance, or I would even look at Dave McCormick in Pennsylvania, right? Sure. No one expected him to win, right? But he understood place. He went to all 67 of our counties where Bob Casey didn't. He went to Philadelphia. That was it.
Yeah, and so we did some polling at American Compass back a couple months ago, right before the election, about what the American dream meant to people. You know, I think there are a lot of, particularly legacy institutions on the right, and even on the left, who talk about the American dream as it's the boundless ability to go as far as your talents will take you and move up the ladder and go wherever in the world you want to go. And we were really surprised by our findings because what we found was that American voters, our respondents, said actually the way that they think about the American dream is the ability to have a good paying job that supports a family in their hometown.
Yes.
Right? The conceptualization of the American dream, what people really want, is deeply tied to place. It is, it isn't this like, the Hollywood movie. You go to college, you get this great degree, and you're the first in the family to do it, and then you rise up the corporate ladder, and you're on top of the world at the end. That's not actually what people want.
No.
Has that been? It sounds like that has also been your experience reporting. Does that resonate with the folks that you talk to?
It's all throughout my book. All throughout my book. People on paper that you would think would be voting for Kamala Harris because of their education and being in the suburbs, voted for Trump because of they was more value to them to live near their grandparents or their parents or their grandchildren, as opposed to getting a nice big bonus at the end of the year and a new car lease every 2 years. There's so much more value, and it's a sense of power, but not power that we think of as you see it in a corporate boardroom. Power in that your family is with you, either before the people that came before you or the ones that are possibly coming after you, your children and your grandchildren. And that's power and stability in the community. And that meant that you were able to keep your family intact so that you can go to Sunday dinner every Sunday. Look, I am 66 years old and I still go to Sunday dinner at my parents' house. It is a very big tradition in my state.
Yeah, that's incredible. You don't look a day over 45. And that's only because I've got you at an angle here in the podcast studio. But Salena, there's kind of tied to this. So one of the other things that we found in this polling is that the thing when Americans talk about economic concerns, right, the things that they are worried about, the big issue wasn't it's not the ability to move up the economic ladder. It's to kind of hold on to the things that they have. Right, and they feel, and overwhelmingly, we found that the people who cared about rootedness and place, you see that the thing that they're worried about, that they're grasping for, is the ability to just do these things, not live beyond their means, not get more things, not get a bigger house, not get a better car. It's almost by fingernails trying to hold on to so many of these things. And I think it's one of the underappreciated things when we talk about economics and the kind of economy that the American people want. And I know you talk about this a little bit in your book as well, about like, what is it that the American voter is actually striving for? Why is it that because of this placidness, people are less interested in whether or not the GDP is going to go up reliably and more interested in whether or not they can have a job that supports their family? Is that also something that you've seen in your reporting from your book? It seems like that's the case.
Yeah, that's the case. Stability within your family and stability in your community. Look, the people in Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and North Carolina have all seen communities eviscerated by trade
Yeah.
deals that destabilize their families and destabilize their communities, and it often let them looking like they were bombed out in Beirut. Youngstown, Ohio comes to
Yeah.
mind. Aliquippa, Pennsylvania comes to mind.
Yeah.
Places that were thriving with dozens of churches
Yep.
and fraternal organizations and schools, and they're just absolutely gone.
Yeah.
And so stability is something that is really, really important. Look, there is a reason there's 2,000 Steeler bars all across the country.
Yeah.
Because it's because 200,000 people moved out in between 1970 and 1984, and they still yearn for that connective tissue for home.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally believe that. And so to your point, right, about the Rust Belt and deindustrialization and the China shock, those were awful and seismic events that I think we're only now, and not even completely now, but only now starting to make sense of the cultural impacts and the familial impacts and all these other sort of impacts beyond just the raw economics of it. Do you think, right, you've reported extensively on the Trump administration, extensively on the campaign. Do you think there is hope that this placedness comes back for those who don't have it? Or are we kind of two-tracking at this point? Do we have a place society and a placeless society? Is there hope of a convergence?
There has to be respect from the placeless.
Yeah.
Until that happens, it's not going to happen. As for the placed, I hope people go and read my story about U.S. Steel,
Yeah.
and how much of a game changer that was. That's 14,000 jobs coming back to the Mon Valley.
Yeah.
That's families staying intact. I have a story the other day just about how much that at the Washington Examiner about just how much that has kept young people from moving away, knowing that
Yeah.
their parents still have jobs, but also they have an opportunity, whether they go on to college or walk out right out of high school and make
Yep.
$110,000 a year. Like in Western Pennsylvania, you're rich.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay? You
Yeah. So
might,
so
oh,
the
yeah, bud.
Yeah. Okay. So both of these pieces are going to be in the show notes, so folks who are listening now will be able to read them in detail. But talk to me a little bit about this. I think this is a super, super important and valuable conversation about like there are jobs coming back to at least some of these communities in ways that aren't just valuable for people who are looking for work, but support families and support communities beyond that.
Yeah.
What did you see when you were on the ground, and what do you hope will come from all of it?
Well, in U.S. Steel, already the money has started pouring in. They've already started hiring. These are 3 Mon Valley, which stands for Monongahela, meaning they're in the valley along the Monongahela River. These are towns that have been just dying, and it's been a slow, painful, awful death.
Yeah.
It's not been quick. And not only stabilizing the steel industry, but reinvesting it and creating new jobs and jobs that support it. Helps the housing. It helps small mom and pop shops that have been
Yeah.
just struggling, right? It's and churches, right? Like all
Yeah.
these things you don't think about are all seeing having their lives relived. And I think it's also important to note that people don't think about this. I did a Washington Post piece about this, but AI is going to create a boom in Rust Belt like you don't understand. And and Western Pennsylvania is a perfect example of that. What you have are a lot of old coal-fired power plants that have been
Sure.
decommissioned.
Uh-huh.
You have natural gas, you have nuclear, you have coal. Well, what does AI need? It needs so much energy. It needs an
Energy. Sure.
abundance of energy. It's going to increase anywhere between 2.5 to 5% base load. So where's that energy going to come from? It's not going to come from solar panels. It's
Yeah.
not going to come from wind. They don't have that stability. So it's going to come from coal and nuclear and natural gas, mostly natural gas, but you need the other two because you need to always to be reliable. So you need the workers for that. You need the boilermakers. You need the chemists. You need the engineers. You need
Yep.
the labor, but you also need the intellectual part of it, which is coming from our university at Carnegie Mellon and the University of Pittsburgh and Temple
Yeah. Okay.
and
Great.
Penn State to run the data power centers, the AI data power centers, which is also going to create this coalition of people that are shoulder to shoulder in providing this service that
Yeah.
come from all different walks of life but are all in the same industry.
Yeah, and I think part of it too is it provides not just immediate jobs, but long-term jobs, right? Those Boilermakers are going to be necessary for the life of all of this work, for the life of this energy
Absolutely.
production. And that, we at American Compass, we had just put out like a collection of pieces about the intersection of AI and automation and workers and worker power and how we can hold those things fast. Because I think a lot of people, they hear, oh, AI is coming, like AI is coming down, it's going to wipe out all these jobs, it's going to annihilate everything. And I think there's obviously risk, there's danger. I was at an event last week with the Teamsters talking about AI and workers and Rerum Novarum, the encyclical from Pope Leo XIII, right? There's a lot of intersections here. That protection is really important to ensure that workers are able to benefit from these things. But I also think we don't talk enough about the ways that these increases in energy that are going to be necessary are supporting blue-collar jobs and working-class jobs in places like Pennsylvania.
Plumbers are almost already the most important trade in our lives. Like if your
Yeah.
toilet's not working, if you're not getting water, you've got problems. They are
Yep.
going to be outsized in their importance when it comes to AI.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think that's an encouraging note to end it on. Salena, thank you so much for making the time to join us. Thank you for all your excellent reporting. We'll link a couple of your pieces in the show notes. Thank you for going out and doing the shoe leather reporting that this country really needs.
Thank you.
Of course. And we'll be back again soon with another episode of the American Compass podcast.